The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains as Jacob Thornton rode into the small frontier town of Cedar Creek, his horse's hooves echoing against the wooden planks of the main street. 3 years had passed since he'd last seen this place, 3 years since he'd left everything behind, including the woman he loved more than his own life. His weathered hands gripped the reins tighter as memories flooded back. Sarah McKenna's laughter dancing on the wind, her gentle touch. When she'd bandaged his wounds after a cattle drive gone wrong, the way her eyes sparkled like starlight when she looked at him, as if he were the only man in the world who mattered. But that was before the war, before he'd been branded an outlaw for refusing to fight against the native tribes who had shown him nothing but kindness. Before Sarah's father had forbidden their union and arranged her marriage to the banker's son from back east, Jacob had left that night without a word, carrying nothing but his guilt and a heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, he told himself. It was for the best that Sarah deserved better than a man with blood on his hands and a price on his head. Now, as he dismounted outside the general store, he wondered if coming back had been a mistake. But the letter in his pocket, worn thin from countless readings, had given him no choice. His younger brother Tom was dying, and Jacob was the only family he had left. The bell above the store's door chimed as he entered, and Mrs. Patterson looked up from behind the counter. Her face went pale as recognition dawned. "Jacob Thornton," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never thought I'd see you again." "Ma'am," he tipped his hat politely. "I'm here to see Tom." Her expression softened with sympathy. "He's been asking for you every day. Doc says it won't be long now." She paused, then added quietly, "Sarah's been nursing him, you know. Every day since he took ill." Jacob's heart clenched. Of course Sarah would be there. Even after everything, she'd never been able to turn away from someone in need. It was one of the things he'd loved most about her, and one of the reasons he'd known he had to let her go. "Is she?" he began, then stopped. He had no right to ask. "Married," Mrs. Patterson finished gently. "No. Called it off 3 days before the wedding. Said she couldn't marry a man she didn't love." Her eyes held a knowing look. "Some hearts just can't be forced, I suppose." Jacob left the store with his supplies and a soul full of questions he wasn't sure he was ready to have answered. The small cabin on the outskirts of town looked exactly as he remembered it, whitewashed walls, a red wooden door, and wildflowers growing in Sarah's mother's old garden. He was still gathering courage to knock when the door opened. And there she was. Sarah McKenna stood in the doorway like a vision from his dreams. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. 3 years had only made her more beautiful, but there was a sadness in her expression that hadn't been there before. She breathed, and the way she said his name made his knees weak. Sarah removed his hat, suddenly feeling like a schoolboy again. "I heard about Tom," she nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "He's been waiting for you." Tom was lying in the small back bedroom, his face gaunt and pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw his brother. "Jake," he wheezed, reaching out a trembling hand. "You came?" "Of course I came, little brother." Jacob took his hand, shocked by how frail Tom had become. "I'm here now." They talked for hours about the ranch they'd dreamed of owning together, about the adventures they'd planned to have. Sarah moved quietly around the room, bringing cool cloths and medicine, her presence both a comfort and a torment to Jacob's wounded heart. As evening fell, breathing became more labored. Jacob held his hand as his brother slipped away peacefully, whispering about green pastures and clear streams, where they'd meet again someday. The funeral was small, just a handful of townspeople who remembered Tom's kind heart and gentle spirit. Jacob stood beside the grave, numb with grief, as the preacher spoke words that seemed to float past him like autumn leaves. It was Sarah who finally broke through his shock, her soft hand touching his arm as the last mourners departed. "Loved you so much," she said quietly. "He never stopped believing you'd come back. I should have come sooner." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. "I should have been here. You're here now. That's what matters." They walked back toward town in comfortable silence, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It felt almost like old times before the world had torn them apart, before pride and fear had built walls between their hearts. "Sarah," Jacob began, then stopped. What right did he have to say the words burning in his chest? What right did he have to ask her to wait for a man who might never be free of his past? As if reading his thoughts, she turned to face him. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Jacob looked into her eyes and saw not anger, but a pain that matched his own. "Because I loved you too much to ask you to share my burden," he said finally. "Because you deserved better than a life on the run with an outlaw. Don't you think that should have been my choice to make?" The simple question shattered the last of his defenses. "Sarah, Mr. Thornton." They turned to see a small native boy running toward them, his face streaked with tears and dirt. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, and he was clearly terrified. "Please," the boy gasped in broken English. "Help my sister." Jacob knelt down to the child's level. "What's your name, son?" "Little Wolf," the boy replied. "My sister. She'll fall from horse. Can't wake up." Without hesitation, Jacob scooped the boy up and placed him on his horse. "Show me where." They found the girl beside a small creek about a mile outside town. She was unconscious, her left leg bent at an unnatural angle. Sarah immediately knelt beside her, her gentle hands checking for injuries with the skill of someone who'd helped Doc Henderson for years. "Her leg's broken, and she's got a head injury," Sarah said quietly. "We need to get her to town. The people, they not help us," Little Wolf said, his voice heavy with resignation. "They afraid of my people." Jacob's jaw tightened. He'd seen too much prejudice and fear in his travels, too much hatred between people who should have been neighbors. "They'll help her," he said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." The girl, who Little Wolf said was called Morning Star, remained unconscious as they carried her to Doc Henderson's office. The doctor took one look at her injuries and shook his head. "I'll do what I can," he said, "but she needs medicine. Don't have laudanum for the pain, quinine for the fever that's starting. It's that kind of medicine costs money I know these children don't have." Jacob didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small leather pouch that contained his life savings money he'd been planning to use to start fresh somewhere far away. "Will this be enough?" he asked, emptying the coins onto the doctor's desk. Doc Henderson's eyes widened. "More than enough. But son, it's what needs to be done." Jacob cut him off. As the doctor worked, Jacob sat with Little Wolf in the waiting area. The boy's small hand clutched in his weathered one. Sarah had gone to fetch food and clean clothes, understanding, without being asked, that these children needed more than just medical care. "Why you help us?" Little Wolf asked quietly. "Most white men, they cross street when they see us." Jacob thought about the question for a long moment. "Because we're all just people trying to get by in this hard world," he said finally. "And because someone once told me that kindness is never wasted, it always comes back when you need it." "Most?" The boy nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to him. When Sarah returned with supplies, she found Jacob teaching Little Wolf to play poker with matchsticks, both of them grinning despite their worry. The sight made her heart ache. With longing for the life they might have had together, Doc Henderson emerged from his office looking tired but hopeful. "She's stable," he announced. "The fever's broken, and the leg will heal clean if she stays off it for a few weeks." Ow. Little Wolf rushed to his sister's bedside, tears of relief streaming down his face. Morning Star's eyes fluttered open, and she managed a weak smile when she saw her brother. "We need to get word to their people," Sarah said quietly. "They must be worried sick." "I know their camp," Jacob replied. "I'll ride out at first light." But when morning came, Jacob didn't need to search for the native camp. As he stepped outside Doc Henderson's office, he stopped short at the sight that greeted him. Warriors lined the main street of Cedar Creek as far as the eye could see. Not 100, not 200, but what looked like 500 mounted. Braves sitting in perfect silence on their painted horses. The morning sun glinted off lance tips and shield decorations, and the only sound was the soft snorting of horses and the creak of leather. The townspeople had gathered in doorways and behind windows, their faces pale with fear. Jacob could see Sheriff Morrison's hand hovering near his gun, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. At the front of the gathering sat a man. Jacob recognized Chief Stone Bear, a leader known throughout the territory for his wisdom and his skill in battle. The chief's eyes met Jacob's across the dusty street, and he slowly dismounted his horse. Jacob walked forward to meet him, acutely aware that every eye in town was watching. When they stood face to face, Chief Stone Bear studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You are the one called Thornton," the chief said in careful English. My grandson tells me you gave your gold to heal his sister, that you shared your food when they were hungry." The chief's weathered face showed no emotion. "Is this true?" Jacob glanced back toward the doctor's office, where he could see Little Wolf and Morning Star watching through the window. They needed help. Any decent person would have done the same. Chief Stone Bear's stern expression finally cracked, revealing the hint of a smile. Any decent person? Perhaps. But not many would empty their purse for children not their own. Not many would see past the color of skin to the need beneath. The chief raised his voice so the entire street could hear. "Could have fought against us when the soldiers came. Instead, he chose peace. He chose to see us as people, not enemies. And when the white man's war demanded he take sides, he chose to leave rather than raise his hand against those who had shown him kindness." A murmur ran through the crowd of townspeople. Jacob felt Sarah's presence behind him and drew strength from her nearness. "Yesterday," Chief Stone Bear continued, "this same man gave his last coins to save a native child's life. He shared his bread with a hungry boy, showed the kind of courage that has nothing to do with guns or fighting, the courage to do what is right, even when no one is watching." The chief reached into a leather pouch at his side and withdrew something that made Jacob's breath catch in his throat. It was a Baja deputy marshal's star, tarnished with age but still gleaming with authority. "The territorial governor is a fair man," Chief Stone Bear explained. "When he heard of your actions, he decided that past misunderstandings should be forgotten. He has cleared your name and offers you this position, Deputy Marshal of Cedar Creek, with the backing of both the territorial government and the tribes of this region." Jacob stared at the badge, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. A chance to start over. A chance to build the life he'd always dreamed of. "There is one condition," the chief added with a slight smile. "You must promise to keep showing the same wisdom and compassion that brought us here today." "I promise," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. As Chief Stone Bear pinned the badge to Jacob's vest, 500 warriors began to chant a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. It was a song of honor, Sarah realized. A way of telling the world that this man had earned their respect. When the ceremony was finished, the warriors began to disperse as quietly as they had arrived. But Chief Stone Bear lingered for a moment, placing a fatherly hand on Jacob's shoulder. "The children's grandfather wishes to thank you personally," he said. "Little Wolf and Morning Star are the last of their family line, precious beyond measure. You saved more than a life yesterday. You saved a future." As the last of the warriors rode away, the townspeople began to emerge from their hiding places. Jacob saw respect in their eyes now, and something else, acceptance. The outlaw was gone, replaced by a man who had proven his worth not with a gun, but with kindness. Sheriff Morrison approached, unbuckling his own badge with a wry smile. "Reckon you'll be wanting this back, Deputy Marshal Thornton." Always knew you were the better man for the job." Jacob shook the older man's hand, still overwhelmed by the turn his fortunes had taken. But when he turned to find Sarah, his heart nearly stopped. She was walking away, her head down, her shoulders shaking with what he realized were tears. "Sarah, wait." He caught up with her just outside the church, gently taking her arm. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She turned to face him, and he saw joy and sorrow warring in her beautiful eyes. "I'm so happy for you, Jacob. You deserve this chance at a new life. Then why are you crying?" She smiled through her tears, reaching up to touch the new badge on his chest. "Because I know what this means. You'll be able to go anywhere now. Do anything. You're free to find the life you've always wanted." Jacob stared at her in amazement. Even now, after everything, she was thinking of his happiness before her own. "Sarah McKenna," he said, taking her hands in his. "You stubborn, wonderful woman, don't you know yet? Know it? You are the life I've always wanted." He dropped to one knee, right there in the dusty street, pulling a small ring from his pocket, his mother's ring, the one thing he'd never been able to bring himself to sell. "I should have asked you 3 years ago," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have trusted you to make your own choice. I'm asking known because I'm finally respectable, not because I finally have something to offer, but because I can't imagine another day without you by my side." Sarah's tears fell freely now, but she was smiling as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, yes, yes," as Jacob slipped the ring onto her finger. The church bells began to ring, whether by coincidence or divine intervention. Neither of them cared. The sound echoed across the prairie, carrying news of their joy to every corner of the territory. Little Wolf and Morning Star, now strong enough to stand, watched from the doctor's porch with wide grins. Doc Henderson wiped his eyes with his handkerchief. Even Sheriff Morrison was smiling as he tipped his hat to the newly engaged couple. That evening, as the sun set over Cedar Creek in a blaze of gold and crimson, Jacob and Sarah sat on the porch of their soon-to-be home, planning their future together. They would be married in the spring, when the wildflowers bloomed. They would build a ranch where all were welcome, regardless of the color of their skin. They would raise children who understood that kindness was the greatest strength of all. "You ever wonder what would have happened if Little Wolf hadn't found us that day?" Sarah asked, nestled against Jacob's shoulder. Jacob thought about the chain of events that had led them here, how a simple act of compassion had set everything in motion, how sharing his last coins with hungry children had somehow led to the return of everything he'd thought he'd lost forever. "I think," he said slowly, "that kindness always finds a way to come home." In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. And somewhere on the prairie, Chief Stone Bear was telling his grandchildren the story of the cowboy who chose love over fear, compassion over hatred. It was a story that would be passed down through generations, a reminder that in a world often cruel and unforgiving, one person's kindness could change everything. As the stars appeared one by one in the endless western sky, Jacob Thornton held the woman he loved and knew that he was finally, truly home. The outlaw's journey was over. The marshal's life, the life he was meant to live, was just beginning. And in the morning, Little Wolf would bring his sister wildflowers, and Morning Star would teach the marshal's new wife how to braid her hair in the native way, and the circle of kindness would continue to grow, spreading across the frontier like ripples on a still pond, touching hearts and changing lives with each gentle wave. The West was still wild, still dangerous, still unforgiving. But in one small town in the middle of nowhere, love had won. Sometimes that's all the hope the world needs.